Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, The Last Ranger by Peter Heller. This is a take 2, so I hope I am satisfied with the result, and I hope that you are as well. This book is copyright 2023. I bought it new for $27, and I'm going to start by saying that the price I paid for it, $27, was more than I feel it was actually worth. I feel like I would have liked it if I had spent used book rates, $13, for this kind of book, but $27 is just so expensive for something I had almost no interest in. Now, the title page art is by Takahiro, Shutterstock.com. The jacket images Yellowstone Park after Thomas Moran. Jacket design is by Kelly Blair. This is first edition. And this book is the kind of book that I'm usually not the biggest fan of because it, like The Naturalist, is set in a allegedly real world setting. In both cases, they are set in northern Rockies and in a mystery setting. Unlike The Naturalist, this book does not feature like a super genius whiz kid that can solve anything by figuring out all these different impossible connections. This book does feature a park ranger, and usually I like that sort of book, but I felt like it did not deliver on the title promise. There was nothing last about this ranger, and I mentioned that at the start of the year during the 2025 year in review video. So what was this book actually about? Well, this book was a mystery where the park ranger, the main character, Ren Hopper, is a law enforcement ranger living in a remote cabin on park property, and he lives in a cabin on a like camping loop, something like that, and one of the permanent residents there is a wolf researcher that he has a pretty good working relationship with, and he always tries to keep an eye out for her. Now, the story begins because she does not come back from a regularly scheduled wolf watching, wolf studying trip. And so when he goes out there, he finds her leg caught in a trap, very close to death from blood loss and from the cold. But he rescues her and is able to then begin an investigation. He has a good idea, though, a good idea of who he should be looking into. And it does indicate that based on the jacket summary. And so, like a lot of hardcovers with jackets, the back is just praise, and the actual like summary is on the inside jacket page. It says, Officer Ren Hopper is a ranger with the National Park Service, tasked with duties both mundane and thrilling. When Ren, hiking through the back country on his day off, encounters a big man with a dog and a gun chasing a small black bear up a hill, his hackles are raised. And what this does is it follows his investigation into that poacher. And that poacher turns out to not be explicitly breaking the law because he is encouraging, not through baiting, but through other means, these animals to come off park property, and then when it is legal to shoot them, he does. And now, to be clear, I'm fairly certain it is only questionably legal within the confines of this book. I'm fairly certain in a real world scenario that would be considered illegal. It would be outright poaching. In this setting, it isn't. Or at least it's not verifiable enough to be able to go after this poacher. And we have seen stories like that in other videos and other books. In Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good, the titular story is about the game warden in Maine finding a known poacher's stash of apples in a field. The stash of apples baiting in deer so he could shoot them. But he didn't see the poacher anywhere near, so he peed on the apples to prevent the deer from going near that pile. But in that short story, the the warden ends up going to a party hosted by that poacher. Everyone is drinking alcohol except for the warden, and he's drinking apple cider that it turns out was made by that poacher from those apples the warden had peed on. So there was this back and forth in the real world stories about poachers getting back at the game wardens or rangers and so on and so forth, back and forth, back and forth. In this case, there is a back and forth, but the poacher isn't doing anything explicitly illegal, or at least not in a way that anyone can catch. The investigation is into whether the different aspects of this park ecosystem, the visitors, the locals, the rangers, the animals, the sign, how many of these different perspectives show the truth. So in the natural world, we do see that he has traps, and those are his own personal traps. And that is illegal, but it can't be explicitly tied to that poacher unless they see him put those traps out. The other rangers have dealt with this local a lot of times and feel like he is actually a poacher. He is a wife beater. He is a criminal. He is the sort of person that would attempt to kill someone over disrupting his hunting, his poaching. And so the Rangers have one perspective. The locals think he's a pretty good guy. They may not necessarily think him a hero for killing the wolves, but he is a decent friend. And so one perspective may prove the rumors true, another perspective proves them false. And the story is about Ranger Hopper investigating this man and eventually coming to a conclusion that leads to the climax. Now, the wolf researcher friend of Ranger Hopper is very aggressive in defending them. And she and this poacher have an antagonistic relationship. And in the story, and this is something I did actually like about it, and is a pretty big spoiler, so maybe skip 30 seconds to a minute ahead if that's what you're concerned about. What's really interesting is that she is threatening him and goading him into doing something that would be illegal enough to send him to prison. And he wants to get rid of her because she keeps on disrupting him. She is putting him in danger. And so there is a back and forth where the antagonist is being antagonized by the protagonist's friend. And the mystery then becomes, what is the poacher actually doing? What is the friend doing? And how does the ranger then dissolve that tension and resolve it without anyone getting hurt? How can he do this without affecting their futures? My issue with this book is that there's nothing last about this ranger. He's just a park ranger. There's 3 or 4 others that are named that you interact with in the narrative, but he's not the last ranger. There's no last anything about this story. And so the title I felt was a misnomer. It was disappointing once I actually read the narrative. And the narrative itself is almost 300 pages long. Like it felt like it was 450. How just it kept on going and wasn't invigorating or energetic enough to really get through it quicker. So it was kind of a slog to read. And on top of the high price for this, I bought it new. It just was a disappointing book. Now, I bought it new at a bookstore in Denver back in the summer of 2024 when I was visiting my ex. And at the time, I bought the book Spear. The short novel Spear was a good purchase. I am really happy with that book. The Last Ranger was a disappointing one. So, one strike good, one strike not so good for that bookstore. It was a pretty good one, and I would probably return if I was ever in that area. I'm not sure I'll have a reason to be there on a Sunday morning, but maybe I will be. Actually, now that I think about it, I probably would be. I purchased this book on a Sunday morning, and I was up there for an Of Monsters and Men concert last November. All Sunday morning, I could have gone to something like that. So there's reason to go back to Denver mostly for concerts, and I may go back to that bookstore. I'd probably go to the Tattered Cover, I think is the name of it. It's a local chain and probably better. Or The Matter on, I forget what street it was also a pretty good one. And I'm hoping that the books I purchased there are good. One of the books I purchased at The Matter, I ended up mailing to a friend because we had just talked about the exact kind of thing that the cover title was about. And it's a collection of short stories about, and the title is, it is something along the lines of Don't Whistle at Night. And he had just been talking about that, thinking maybe it was an old Scots Irish or British Isles thing. He'd always heard about it growing up in the Maryland area, but there's not a heavy Native American presence in that part of the country. So seeing a collection of short stories, horror short stories, written by Indigenous Americans, and that collection being titled Don't Whistle at Night or whatever the exact title was pretty cool. I sent him that book. So the bookstores in Denver that I've been to, usually satisfying, and this one was just one of those situations where it wasn't satisfying enough for me to want to keep it. And I am going to be putting it back into the used book marketplace along with The Unremembered, which I discussed recently. And there's a couple lit RPG books on that shelf that kind of proved for me again why I'm not a big fan of the lit RPG genre, that tag. I don't like fantasy stories. You see it a lot in anime and manga where someone is transported to another world and they are aware of the RPG mechanics in it. In some of the more modern lit RPG stories, it's fantasy world comes to real world and then they adapt, but fantasy world also brings a bunch of RPG mechanics with it. The books I'm talking about, they did have the RPG mechanics in real world, but it's set in the past, so there isn't an understanding of role-playing games in the 17th century. I think it was the 18th century, actually. But The Last Ranger was disappointing in the same way those lit RPG books were, in the same way that The Unremembered was. It just wasn't fun, and in a way that I don't really know how I can describe without it just sounding like I just don't vibe with that. And that's perfectly fine. If you don't like a book or a style of book or a genre tag, there's no need to finish that book or no need to like it if you have finished the book. So, with The Unremembered, I did not finish that one, but I like fantasy. I did finish those lit RPG books above me, and I liked them enough, but they suffered from a kind of issue that I'll discuss in that video's rant. But The Last Ranger, The Unremembered, those two books, maybe one or two books on my shelf, those are going back into the used book marketplace. I'm going to bring them to Page One Books. Hopefully, I get some good credit for them because I'm really liking Page One Books in Albuquerque, and I live here now, so I am hoping that I'll be going back to Page One Books on a regular basis. Now, in the past, I went to Coas Books in Las Cruces on a monthly basis. I don't think I'm going to Page One Books maybe once a quarter, maybe once every other month. It is not going to be as common as frequently as I went to Coas Books. So, and that there's a couple reasons for that. Coas Books is right on the main strip of Las Cruces, New Mexico, where all the good tap rooms are, the good breweries, where the farmers market is. So if I had time and I went to Las Cruces, I would stop by Coas. In Albuquerque, Page One Books is not near the center part of the town, and there's not even one explicit center of the town. There's Central, which has a couple venues for concerts that I've been to. There's Old Town, which is a couple blocks away from the museums and the sawmill, which is another part of downtownish area. So it's kind of it's a lot more spread out than Las Cruces. It's a lot more spread out than El Paso even. So I'm not sure I'll be going to Page One Books often because it's just out of the way, but it's a good store. And so this book, like I said, $27, way too much. $13 maybe would have been worth it. So this one's going into the used book marketplace, and some of the other books I've discussed in the past and will discuss in the future are going back there as well. So yeah. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.